The meeting is, we're going to begin this morning now that we have at least 3 of our members present, and we have one of our Republican members, colleagues present. At this time, we're going to begin without a quorum. So we will begin having the hearing, and once we reach quorum, then we can vote. I think the first bill we have up this morning is SB254, author Mr. Allen. Want to come forward, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with the Chair's permission, we have my wonderful joint author, Senator Leno,
definitely
here. So, Madam Chair and members, good morning. SB 254 would once again place on a measure on the state ballot regarding the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's because the legislature voted to place a similar measure on the November 2014 ballot pursuant to SB 1272 by former State Senator Ted Lieu. The measure was designated as Proposition 49. However, in response to a challenge, the California Supreme Court removed Proposition 49 from the ballot while they considered whether the legislature has the authority to do something like this. And on January 4th, 2016 of this year, the court issued its decision concluding that the legislature could pose this question to voters because it was related to potential federal constitutional amendments. Now, unfortunately, the court also said that since SB 1272 specifically required the measure to go to ballot in November 2014, the legislature would have to pass another bill to place it on a future ballot if they wanted to do this again. So on January 19th, the legislature filed a petition with the Supreme Court requesting that they modify their opinion and direct the Secretary of State to place Prop 49 on the November 2016 ballot without the need for the legislature to take action. But the court ultimately rejected that request without comment. So here we are today, asking you to approve a measure that the Supreme Court said they should never have removed from the ballot in the first place, but refused to put back on. No matter how you feel about Citizens United, I believe we would be setting an unacceptable precedent if we don't stick to our guns and put this measure back on the ballot. Citizens United is but one of the many U.S. Supreme Court rulings that have made effective campaign finance reform more difficult. It rolled back the previous ban on corporate spending in federal elections, opening the door to unlimited corporate funds being spent on influencing elections. At the core of these decisions is the belief that spending money in an election is a protected form of free speech. And those rights extend not only to human beings, but to other entities as well, including corporations. I believe most Californians do not share that sentiment. Indeed, most Americans don't share that sentiment. And we should give them the opportunity to make their collective voices heard on an issue of great constitutional import on the national level. This measure would specifically ask voters whether California's elected officials should use all of their constitutional authority, including but not limited to proposing and ratifying one or more amendments to our United States Constitution to overturn Citizens United and other applicable judicial precedents to allow for the full regulation or limitation of campaign contributions and spending to ensure that all citizens, regardless of wealth, may express their views to one another, and to make clear that corporations should not have the same constitutional rights as human beings. My good friend and joint author, Senator Leno, would also like to address the committee, if it pleases the chair.
Thank you. Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a real pleasure and an honor to join Senator Allen in jointly authoring this measure. And he has laid out all the nuts and bolts, the reasons for why we're here, how it is that we're here. And I just want to reiterate that this is of such high importance. And there have been editorials both for and against whether we should have a question of this sort on a statewide ballot. But there is nothing more important than this because it really is the essence of our democracy. Should the power of one's voice be dependent upon the size of one's checkbook? That's really what is at the heart of the matter here. And I just wanted to, if I may, Madam Chair, share with the committee Justice Kennedy's statement when he joined the majority. And for many and varied reasons, I have enormous respect for Justice Kennedy and his decision-making. But I think his quote here is just naive and misinformed. This is relative to Citizens United. He said that with the advent of the Internet, prompt disclosure of expenditures can provide shareholders and citizens with the information needed to hold corporations and elected officials accountable for their positions. This transparency enables the electorate to make informed decisions and give proper weight to different speakers and messages. I say naive because I have to ask, has he never heard of dark money organizations? These 501c4 and 501c6 groups are legally allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money on elections and not disclose a single donor. And it's all legal, thanks to Citizens United. The one restriction is they can't say vote for or against or defeat a specific candidate. They can use just about anything other than what the court called these magic words. According to the United States Public Interest Research Group, in the 2012 election, determined that 50% of all outside spending in the presidential race came from these dark money groups. Almost half of all the money spent, we don't know who it came from. The top 5 spent over $75 million on television ads alone, and it will be exponentially higher this year. Who's spending this money? Is it foreign dictators? Is it Middle Eastern oil princes? We don't know, and we'll never know. And this fact seriously jeopardizes our democracy. So Senator Allen and I are here to make the point that over 80% of Americans polled agree that Citizens United should be overturned. And this is not a partisan issue. In that same poll, 72% of Republicans said bad decision. 82% of Democrats said bad decision. 84% of independents said it was a bad decision. So let the people of California have a say on this. Let the voters express themselves. That is the very definition of democracy. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum, so we're going to call roll right now.
Weber.
Here.
Harper. Travis Allen. Gordon. Lowe. Mullen. Nazarian. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Okay, those in favor will each give 2 minutes. Witnesses in favor? Do you have any? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes, hi, Chair Weber, members of the committee. This is Nicholas Heidorn with California Common Cause in strong support of SB 254. In our opinion, Citizens United has been one of the most damaging opinions to our democracy of the past 50 years. The court overturned decades of precedent in holding that the First Amendment prevents the federal government and the states from imposing any limits on corporate independent expenditures and campaigns. The entirely predictable result has been a flood of super PAC money into elections, which threatens to drown out the voices of ordinary Americans and Californians, as well as to distort our politics towards the interests of the wealthy over the interests of the people. In Congress, independent expenditures went overnight from being a negligible source of political spending to 20% of House spending and 40 to 70% of spending in U.S. Senate races, and those percentages are just growing. The New York Times late last year published a very interesting study where it found that up until that point, over nearly 50% of the spending in the presidential election had come from just 158 families and their companies. In a nation of 320 million people, just 158 families have been responsible for nearly half of the spending. The good news, though, is that Americans are united in their opposition to the role of big money in our politics, and they want to do something about it. A poll, perhaps more recent than the one Senator Leno mentioned, actually found that 83% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans even support overturning Citizens United. Madam Chair, I don't even think baseball or apple pie has a rating that high in terms of trying to get something done. SB 254 gives Californians the opportunity to have their voices heard on Citizens United. California has a long tradition of using voter instructions. In fact, one of the very first uses a century ago was a referendum to say we want direct election of senators. The referendum in California, as well as other states, contributed ultimately to the passage of the 17th Amendment. So we think this type of moral statement has profound effect. In summary, as has been mentioned by Senator Allen, the legislature has already had this discussion in 2012, voted to put this on the ballot. We think that was the right idea then, and we think it is still the right idea now. SB 254 restores to voters the right to be heard on an issue of utmost importance to our democracy. So we urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michelle Sutter. Our organization, MOVI, were the sponsors in 2014 of SB 1272, and we are sponsoring again SB 254. MOVI is an all-volunteer organization based in Los Angeles with chapters in Santa Barbara and San Diego. We have no paid staff. There are, as we see it, 3 issues before the committee with regard to this bill. The first is the proposed ballot measure itself. Should the Overturned Citizens United Act be advanced to the ballot? In 2014, this was the only consideration before that Elections and Redistricting Committee. The second issue was well covered by the senators, and that's the encroachment of the Supreme Court into the functions of the legislature, and in our opinion, granting the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association's petition for immediate relief required the court to twist itself into a jurisprudential pretzel. And if you look at the Chief Justice's writings on this issue, you can see that that is true. The third issue is the voters of California who remain disenfranchised, and those who lost the Prop 49 court case are still winning. Inexplicably, the court decided not to simply restore Prop 49 to the ballot as logic, justice, and precedent would have directed. Instead, the court decided that all of us, we the people, and you, the legislature, even though Prop 49 was always legitimate, we all needed to go through this all over again and then face a reluctant governor's desk a second time. Forgive us if we find the court's behavior shocking, lacking in the appropriate judicial restraint which we might rightly expect from our state's highest court, and further find their failure to do justice when they might easily have chosen to punitive and alarming. The actions of the California Supreme Court echo the core reason we're here. Issue 1, SB 254, the Overturned Citizens United Act, and the movement to redress the U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have left us without the ability to regulate money in our elections and with very few tools to combat a perverse interpretation of the U.S. Constitution set in motion by 2 opinions from the 1970s, which have allowed and are increasingly allowing corporate primacy and the pursuit of profit to be elevated above every human value. Our courts seem to have abandoned the people in whom the power of our democratic republic actually rests, or at least that's what our founding documents still say. Thousands of Americans gathered in D.C. over the past few weeks in citizens' actions called Democracy Spring and Democracy Awakening. Hundreds of Americans began walking in Philadelphia, and by the time they got to Washington, D.C., where they had pledged and planned to risk arrest demanding democracy, there were thousands. Little was reported about these actions, but USA Today did have a piece with the headline, "Over 900 Arrested." There were ultimately over 1,400 arrests, which is a D.C. demonstrations record, by the way. And that article included the following. There was even some bipartisan support for the demonstrations outside the Capitol building that doesn't see much of it inside lately. John Pudner, executive director of the group Take Back Our Republic, says many conservatives and small business owners also don't feel represented by the big money influencing politics. He joined one day of the 140-mile walk from Philadelphia, and another colleague of the group participated in the demonstrations. Many of you received faxes from Californians over the last several days with the message, America needs to have this conversation and everyone in America knows it. Pass SB 254. Please let us have this conversation we desperately need, and I ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Are there any others wishing to add in addition? Please state your name, organization, and position.
Emily Rush, the Executive Director with the California Public Interest Research Group, or CalPIRG, in strong support of SB 254. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Kyle Jones with Sierra Club California, and also for California League of Conservation Voters, in strong support. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Tim Molina with Courage Campaign. I'm here on behalf of close to 60,000 signatures on strong support for this legislation. Thank you.
57,000.
Next speaker, please.
57,000.
Thank you.
57,000.
Next speaker, please.
Kevin Wolf, Chair of the California Clean Money Action Fund, with 51,296 signatures in support.
Lawrence Abbott, Teamsters Local 70 truck driver and delegate to the Alameda Labor Council, strong support.
Kathy Strickland, Arden Arcade, California. I ask that you support this legislation. It's very important. There's nothing more important to our republic than California being able to say that we want our democracy run freely. Thank you.
Good morning, Shane McLeod with resident of Sacramento. Please give the voters a chance to have their voices heard. Thank you.
And former
Next speaker, please.
Former school board member with Ben.
Rainey Hicks, California Alliance for Retired Americans, Californians for Disability Rights. Nothing's better than this. Please support. Thank you.
Hi, Mary Linton from San Ramon, California. This bill is about campaign finance reform. It's about getting big money out of politics.
Just your position, please.
Okay. And it's about self-government.
Thank you. Just your position, please. Next speaker, please.
My name is Brad Tuvey. I'm from San Ramon, California, and I'm in strong support of SB 254.
Next speaker, please.
Keon Bliss from Sacramento, California, Communications Coordinator for Move to Amend, and in strong support of SB 254.
Next speaker, please.
Derek Cressman from Sacramento, in support of the bill.
Next speaker, please.
Eitan Fenson, resident of Los Altos Democratic Volunteer Center, in strong support.
Next speaker, please. If the folks in favor can vacate their seats so that folks speaking against can come speak.
Excuse me.
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members, good morning. David Wolf with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We're in opposition to the bill, much as we were with SB 1272, which became Proposition 49 a couple of years ago. Obviously, the California Supreme Court removed that bill from the ballot a couple of years ago, and SB 254 would seek to put this voter instruction, I guess we're calling it now, back on the ballot. Just catch my breath for a minute. Thank you. We do believe, members, that SB 254 is a self-serving bill that allows the legislature to manipulate the people's process of the initiative to fulfill its own agenda to boost turnout prior to the November election. We should note it did the same thing a few years back when it pushed all the initiatives from the June to the November ballot. And we do believe, members, that this does lead to voter fatigue in a serious way. It's very possible that there could be 20 measures on the ballot in November. And we would just argue, how much worse would this voter fatigue be if voters are constructed with these advisory measures and voter instruction provisions to ask questions on initiative measures like Citizens United that the legislature might be opposed to. We believe this confuses voters at best, actually, but at worst would actually exhaust them and undermine the initiative process. And we just request that the legislature abide by the will of the Supreme Court decision and limit advisory questions to topics pertaining to the federal Constitution. Ask for a no vote.
Thank you very much. Any others wishing to speak against? Any others wishing to add on against? Thank you very much. That concludes testimony. Any comments, questions from members of the committee? Mr. Gordon.
Thank you. Senators, I happen to believe that the Citizens United decision is one of the worst decisions in the history of this nation and of our Supreme Court. I struggle, though, with the concept of an advisory vote. I had the same struggle with Prop 49. What I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts about why an advisory vote makes a difference. And part of my struggle is that I worry that there will be voter confusion, and that should this get on the ballot and should it pass, the next day voters will say, why is there still corporate money in our elections? And so I don't know whether you have thoughts about that as I try to struggle through in thinking about why we need an advisory vote, even though it's the concept behind the vote is something I fully support.
I think, changing the Constitution is a very difficult thing to do. It's only happened, 27 times in the history of the Republic. And it's a long process. It involves engaging lots and lots of stakeholders, and especially at the state level. And ultimately, from our perspective, this is an opportunity to get that conversation started in terms of addressing what you just called the worst decision in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. I agree. It's an inelegant way, perhaps, of addressing this challenge, and yet we have very few tools to shape the national conversation, and this is a way to do it. To give the voters of the largest state in our nation the opportunity to weigh in on this incredibly controversial decision and start that conversation, I think, is a very important thing, and it's very much within our power and our right as players within our federalist constitutional system.
Just to add to Senator Allen's comments, to have had this conversation, and I suspect you did, in this committee relative to Prop 49, what became Prop 49, I think had more meaning than it does now, because this has been reviewed by courts, and we can do this. So the question then is, should we do it? We have a right to. Should we do it? I wouldn't presuppose that voters are so lacking in information or understanding that they won't, should get this to the ballot, understand what's going on. For those who are paying even more attention, there will be many news reports about it. There will be many editorials, op-eds for and against whether this is a worthy use of the ballot. But given that we have a Congress that, I'll be as gracious as I can here, might benefit from a little popular voice, this will help them recognize. And we won't be the only state. We may be we're not even the first, are we?
No. And if after you're done, or
Madam Chair, if that's all right.
Sure, may I check? As Nicholas pointed out, California has done this before. It was a long time ago. It was 1892. It was a legislature-placed ballot measure asking the question, should California call for a constitutional amendment for the direct election of senators? That passed. It was a very different era. It took 20 years to get that amendment passed, but California played a significant role in the achievement of that, which was also, towards greater democracy. With regards to your question regarding voter confusion or voter fatigue, this has been on the ballot statewide in Montana and in Colorado and in parts of Massachusetts. It's been on the ballot in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Anywhere it has ever been on the ballot, it has never passed with less than 73% of the vote. There was no one who woke up the next morning thinking that they had overturned Citizens United. This movement that is nationwide, if you've seen the MOVI map on this, you can see that 42 of our 50 states have taken some action towards overturning Citizens United, and the movement, as you can see from the witnesses, and in fact many more witnesses came forward after the voices in support. There are even more here than were there then. This is a movement that understands its function, understands what it needs to do, what it's going to take to get an amendment, and a California conversation is unlike any other conversation. I was just looking at the governor's portrait in the portrait gallery from 1982, where he says that we look to California, the country looks to California.
Madam Chair, if I could just finish my comment. So again, I don't believe that we're going to be confusing voters. This is not a common step that the legislature takes. In fact, in my 14 years here, and I think the last time we can historically pinpoint this goes back probably 100 years. But if we can seemingly agree that this issue goes to the core of our democracy, that this decision from polls nearly universally regarded as very poor, and that we need to take action to change it, this is an appropriate next step.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for other members, I would humbly suggest that Dred Scott versus Sanford in 1857, legalizing slavery in the U.S., is clearly the worst decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. But moving on to the issue directly at hand, the legislature has already asked the U.S. Congress to propose and send to states for ratification a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. In fact, it's AJR 22, which I was able to look up. We've also asked Congress to call on a constitutional convention for the purpose of proposing an amendment to the Constitution to limit corporate personhood for the position of campaign finance and political speech in order to overturn Citizens United. That was AJR 1 by Gatto in 2014. In fact, if I can point out specifically that Senator Leno, who's the co-author on this, was also the co-author on AJR 22 and voted for it on the floor in July 5th, 2012, and in Senate Judiciary in June 12th, 2012. It was passed in both the Assembly in March of 2012 and by the Senate in July of 2012. The legislature has already made it perfectly clear that it doesn't like Citizens United and that California wants to ratify a constitutional amendment to be able to overturn it. And so the question here is, isn't it wasteful, especially since the author already has conceded in his opening statement that polls already show that the voters already want Citizens United overturned. The legislature has already taken official action, so why isn't it wasteful to place this on the ballot when the state of California has made its position 100% perfectly clear?
Madam Chair, if I may?
We'll have that in your closing remarks.
Well, if I can put
unless
that,
you're asking a question.
I am asking a question. Why isn't it wasteful?
Okay, answer.
I suspect it's for the same reason that Assemblyman Harper introduced AB 1910, which was an advisory question to be placed before the voters of California relative to transportation funding. This would be no more wasteful than Assemblyman Harper's AB 1910.
And in which that position has not been taken by the state legislature, so it is a question for the people because the legislature hasn't resolved it. And so, Madam Chair, I would assert that this is duplicative, this is redundant, and this is wasteful of taxpayer money when the state of California and the state legislature has already taken this position.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay. Is there a motion? I assume there has been a motion. It's been moved. And second, we are basically moving this item, SB 254. As pointed out earlier, the legislature had voted to place a similar question on the ballot in 2014. The history, of course, is that it was warded by the courts, and now the court has decided that we can do that. So I'm supporting this bill today in order to ensure that voters are given the chance to weigh in on a question that properly should have been on the ballot in 2014. Roll call.
The motion is due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Weber?
Aye.
Weber, aye. Harper?
No.
Harper, no. Travis Allen? Travis Allen, no. Gordon? Aye. Gordon, aye. Lowe? Aye. Lowe, aye. Mullen? Aye. Mullen, aye. Nazarian? Ayes 4, noes 2.
Okay, that bill is out on a 4-2 vote. We'll hold it open for a member who's not here in case they want to weigh in on it.
Madam
Thank
Chair.
you very much.
Thank you, committee members.
Thank you.